Picture a massive group of Chilean coal miners, right? They're marching from a town called Lota.
Yeah, a huge protest march.
Exactly. They are demanding higher wages, steadily making their way down the road, completely unified in their cause. But they never actually make it to their destination.
No, they definitely do not.
Because the earth literally stops them in their tracks. And I don't mean, well, it doesn't put an obstacle in the road. It violently throws them to the ground.
Yeah, right. And the shaking doesn't stop after, 10 seconds or even 20 seconds.
No. They're left clinging to the dirt, literally watching the world around them tear itself apart for 10 uninterrupted minutes.
10 full minutes. It's hard to even wrap your head around.
It really is. Welcome to today's deep dive into the source material, everyone. Today we are covering the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in human history, the 1960 Valdivia Earthquake in Chile.
And, the sheer scale of what happened leading up to and obviously on May 22, 1960, it really challenges our fundamental understanding of geology.
It really does. And to put those 10 minutes into perspective for you listening, I mean, think about all the seismic energy released on planet Earth globally across an entire century.
Between the years 1906 and 2005.
Yeah, so take all of that energy. This single earthquake in Chile accounts for almost a quarter of it.
Oh, it's wild. One single geological event generated nearly 25% of a century's worth of planetary shaking.
A quarter of the entire planet's seismic energy over 100 years.
Yeah.
All released while those miners were just trying to hold on to the grass.
Just trying to survive.
Yeah. So our mission today is to explore how a 9.4 to 9.6 magnitude megaquake like this didn't just shake the ground.
Right. It did a lot more than that.
Exactly. We are looking at the sources to understand how it fundamentally rewrote the geography of South America, triggered this relentless cascade of secondary natural disasters, and, well, forced some dramatic, almost unbelievable shifts in human society and psychology.
It really tested every limit of human endurance.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Because to comprehend the sheer destruction on the surface, we first have to understand, the mechanics. What was happening deep underground to cause an event of this magnitude?
So the primary engine behind this is what seismologists call a megathrust earthquake.
Right.
So Chile sits directly on the Pacific Ring of Fire, right over the Peru-Chile Trench. And this is a subduction zone.
Which means?
Simply put, imagine two massive conveyor belts crashing into each other. You have the incredibly heavy oceanic plate, the Nazca plate, and it's being continuously forced to dive underneath the lighter South American continental plate.
And because they are made of, jagged rock, they don't exactly slide past each other smoothly.
No, not at all. They get completely stuck. The friction locks them together, but those deep tectonic forces, they just keep pushing. So for centuries, unimaginably vast amounts of mechanical stress build up along this boundary. The continental plate is literally being bent backward.
Like compressing a giant geological spring.
Exactly. And eventually, the rock simply cannot hold that stored energy anymore. So leading up to May 22, that tension started to give way.
Yeah, the sources mentioned there were 3 massive foreshocks.
The conception earthquakes.
Right, and those were actually the ones that interrupted the protesting coal miners.
Yes, and those foreshocks were so powerful, they would have easily been in the planet's top 10 earthquakes for that year, all on their own.
But they were just the warm-up.
Just the warm-up.
Which is terrifying. The main event happened just 15 minutes after the third massive foreshock. The fault finally snapped completely, and the area that unzipped was roughly 800 kilometers long.
Yeah, 800 kilometers.
For those of you trying to visualize that, it is essentially the distance from New York to Cincinnati, just tearing open under the earth at a velocity of 3.5 kilometers per second.
Which is, it's almost impossible to fathom rock moving that fast over that distance.
But what's fascinating here is how our understanding of that massive rupture is actually still evolving, right?
Oh, definitely. We've historically operated on something called the tectonic budget theory.
Right. I like to think of that theory like a tectonic credit card.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, like a fault line builds up a balance over centuries of being stuck. That's the mechanical stress you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And when an earthquake happens, it's basically paying off that accrued debt.
Mm-hmm.
So the assumption is that a fault can only release the amount of slip or, debt that it is physically accumulated in that specific area.
Exactly. That is the traditional model. And that leads to a calculated theoretical maximum for any given fault line. Like, the rock can only flex so much before it breaks, meaning it can only hold a certain budget of energy.
Right.
But the 1960 Valdivia earthquake seemed to completely violate those physics.
Really? How so?
Well, it released far more energy than the Peru-Chile Trench should have technically been able to hold.
Yep.
Yeah, and there's this major 2019 research paper explored in our sources that suggests a terrifying answer. It proposes that a secondary fault, known as a Liquiña-Ofqui fault, likely slipped almost simultaneously alongside the main thrust.
Wait. If a fault is basically just a deep crack in the crust, how does one crack snapping magically force a completely different crack miles away to snap at the exact same time?
Well,
Aren't they entirely separate geological systems?
they are separate fractures, but they share the same surrounding bedrock. So when the main subduction zone unzipped so violently, the shock waves and the sudden shift in the continental plate's position, it instantly altered the pressure on that adjacent Liquiña-Ofqui fault.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it was so unstable that the sudden release of pressure from the first fault acted as the trigger for the second.
That's insane.
They essentially combined their tectonic budgets into one catastrophic event.
But if two massive faults can act in tandem like that, doesn't that mean our entire model for predicting the maximum possible earthquake sizes for a region is, well, fundamentally flawed?
It absolutely does. If a megathrust event can instantly trigger a massive slip on an adjacent fault, the theoretical upper limit for earthquake magnitudes is much higher and far more complex than our models previously accounted for.
Wow.
Yeah, it reveals this deep, volatile interconnectivity in subduction zones. And as tectonic stress continues to build today along these boundaries, it implies that it's really only a matter of time before this 1960 record is surpassed.
Which is a deeply sobering realization, especially when you consider that the 10 minutes of ground shaking was really only the first phase of the terror.
Oh yeah, the shaking was just the beginning.
Because when 800 kilometers of the ocean floor violently unzips and shifts, it displaces millions of tons of water above it. The Pacific Ocean was instantly transformed into a global weapon.
Right, and the physics of a megathrust tsunami are entirely different from standard waves.
How so?
It's less like dropping a rock into a pond, which, just creates a splash from the displacement above. It's more like being in a pool when someone violently kicks the bottom liner upward. Yeah, the entire water column, from the ocean floor all the way to the surface, is shoved into the air. And then gravity immediately forces that massive bulge of water to race outward in all directions.
And the speed is terrifying.
Yeah.
The wave crossed the Pacific Ocean at hundreds of kilometers per hour.
Literally matching the cruising speed of a commercial jet.
Exactly. And it struck Hilo, Hawaii, thousands of miles away, with waves over 10 meters high.
Yeah.
Tragically killing 61 people.
It's just devastating.
Yeah, and it maintained enough energy to cause deaths as far away as Japan's Honshu region, and even the Philippines.
The trans-Pacific impact was huge, but locally, along the Chilean coast, the ocean behaved in ways that seemed to, defy reality.
Yeah, I was reading about Corral, the main port of Valdivia.
Oh, right.
The water didn't just rush in. First, it silently swelled up by 4 meters.
Just an eerie, silent swell.
Yeah, and then it rapidly pulled back, completely exposing the ocean floor before returning as monstrous waves reaching up to 25 meters high.
That is an 80-foot wall of water.
80 feet. And I read these surreal accounts in the sources about what happened to the ships that were trapped in the harbor during this. It sounded like something out of a ghost story.
Oh, the ship accounts are wild.
What was the water actually doing to those massive vessels?
Well, and the sheer volume of moving water created these chaotic, inescapable currents. Take the ship named the Canelo, for example.
Okay.
It was anchored in the river, but the tsunami currents were so incredibly violent that the ship was dragged 1.5 kilometers backward and forward, repeatedly.
Like a toy in a bathtub.
Exactly. It was completely out of control. And the friction from the propeller being forced through that churning water actually warmed up the ship's engine on its own.
Wait, really?
Yeah, before the vessel was eventually torn apart and sank.
A ship's engine heating up just from being violently dragged by the water? That's just hard to believe. And then there's the schooner La Milagrosa.
Yes, La Milagrosa. That one was battered out in the ocean for 4 continuous days by these unpredictable, lingering tsunami currents.
4 days of that.
4 days. And in the midst of that chaos on the high sea, the crew miraculously managed to find and rescue 6 severely dehydrated children.
Wow. Where did they even come from?
Those children had been drifting in 2 small riverboats that were simply sucked out to the ocean when the first waves receded.
It's an unbelievable story of survival against all odds. But, looking at the broader map of destruction, I have to admit I had some confusion about how the damage was actually distributed.
How do you mean?
Well, we hear about coastal towns in Chile, like Cuel, being absolutely wiped off the map. But then the port of Talcahuano, just slightly north of the epicenter, barely suffered more than some intense flooding.
Right, that discrepancy.
Yeah. How does an 80-foot wave just selectively skip a town?
Well, the uneven destruction comes down to a phenomenon called tectonic subsidence combined with soil liquefaction.
Okay, break that down for us.
So when researchers mapped the damage using the Mercalli scale, which measures observed physical destruction rather than just seismic energy, they found that your proximity to the epicenter mattered way less than the ground you were built on.
Really? How does the ground itself dictate the tsunami damage?
So during those 10 minutes of intense shaking, the geology of the coastline was physically altered. In areas built on loose sediment, the violent vibrations caused the water trapped between individual grains of soil to be squeezed.
It's like wringing out a sponge.
Kind of, but the water pressure builds up until it literally pushes the soil particles apart, turning solid ground into a slurry of quicksand. That is liquefaction.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, the massive shift of the tectonic plates caused huge stretches of the continental edge to simply drop in elevation.
So the towns didn't just get hit by a wave. The ground beneath them was physically lowered into the ocean.
Precisely. In some places, the land sank permanently by 2 full meters.
2 meters.
Yeah. So if your town sank during the earthquake, the incoming tsunami had an unobstructed path to obliterate everything.
That makes sense.
But if your town was built on solid bedrock that maintained its original elevation, like parts of Talcahuano, the bedrock acted as a shield.
Oh, I see.
The wave still hit, of course, but it resulted primarily in flooding rather than total annihilation. It created a completely uneven, jagged geography of survival and destruction.
Okay, so the coast is being battered by a weaponized ocean. The land is turning to liquid and sinking, and ships are being thrown around like bath toys.
It's apocalyptic.
It is. But while the coast is enduring that, the inland areas up in the Andes Mountains are facing a completely different, rapidly escalating threat.
Yes.
Because the violent movement of the Earth was triggering a chain reaction.
Right. Think about it. When you violently displace 800 kilometers of the Earth's crust, you are suddenly releasing millions of tons of confining pressure off the magma chambers located deep beneath the volcanic Andes Mountains.
So the crust of the Earth literally decompressed.
It literally decompressed.
Which brings us to the next phase of the disaster. Just 38 hours after the main earthquake, the Cordoncalli volcano erupted.
Just compounding the nightmare.
It's like dealing with a clogged sink that's overflowing, but you can't even address it because the house is suddenly caught on fire.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it demonstrates how deeply linked the entire geological system is. The earthquake didn't just shake the volcano. The crust was stretched and fractured so severely that the pressurized magma beneath Cordoncalli instantly found a path of least resistance to the surface.
Right.
It ripped open a 5.5-kilometer-long fissure.
And the detail that stands out most to me here is that the situation on the ground was so completely chaotic, with communications entirely severed, that this massive volcanic eruption went largely unnoticed by the local media.
Yeah, nobody had time to look up at the mountains.
Exactly. It was actually first spotted from above by a passing U.S. Air Force plane.
Which is wild. A major volcanic eruption becoming a mere footnote perfectly illustrates the scale of the crisis. Everyone's attention was diverted because the inland populations were facing an even more immediate existential threat.
Right, the Riñuazo.
Yes. This remains one of the most incredible human engineering and survival stories of the 20th century.
So picture a massive body of water, Lake Riñuhu, positioned high up in the mountains. The intense shaking from the earthquake triggered catastrophic landslides that completely blocked the San Pedro River.
And that river served as the only natural outflow for this entire lake.
Exactly. So with the river dammed by all this debris, the water level of the lake began rising at a terrifying speed.
Every single meter the lake rose added 20 million cubic meters of water to the reservoir.
I can't even picture that much water.
It's massive, and the population of Valdivia, roughly 100,000 people downstream, had already survived the earthquake and the tsunami, and now they were facing the very real prospect of a 480 million cubic meter wall of water bursting through the landslide and wiping out whatever was left of the city.
So the earthquake sent a literal geological time bomb.
A ticking time bomb, yes.
But the human response to defuse it was nothing short of heroic. An engineer named Raul Saez stepped up to lead a massive, desperate operation. He brought together military units and hundreds of civilian workers to try and slowly lower the landslide dam before the water breached the top.
Right, and they initially brought in 27 heavy bulldozers to dig an escape channel.
Which sounds like a good plan.
It does, but the torrential rains and the sheer volume of water had turned the ground into a saturated nightmare. The bulldozers simply sank deep into the mud and became completely useless.
So, with the heavy machinery trapped in the mud and millions of tons of water rising behind a fragile wall of dirt, what do?
They improvise.
Hundreds of workers grabbed shovels. For 2 grueling months, standing in freezing mud, they dug a channel through the landslide entirely by hand.
By hand. It's incredible.
They managed to slowly lower the dam's peak from 24 meters down to 15 meters, allowing them to gradually and safely release 3 billion cubic meters of water. They held back a second cataclysm through sheer, agonizing human willpower.
The logistics of organizing that many people to move that much earth by hand in a disaster zone, it's astounding. It's a profound testament to human resilience.
Absolutely.
However, that resilience manifested in vastly different ways depending on where you were located, how isolated you were, and, well, what resources you had left.
Yeah, and here's where it gets really interesting. When you look at the source material, this earthquake acts as the ultimate societal stress test.
Oh, 100%.
When human beings are pushed past their absolute psychological and physical breaking points, how do they respond to regain a sense of control? We see 2 diametrically opposed coping mechanisms emerge here.
We really do.
Let's look at the institutional response first.
Okay, so for the Chilean government in Santiago, the disaster forced a period of what economists call creative destruction. The sheer scale of the ruin made it glaringly obvious that existing infrastructure and emergency protocols were wholly inadequate.
They just weren't up to the task.
Not at all. So in response, the Ministry of Economics and a development agency called Corfo constructed a massive, modernized reconstruction plan.
They recognized that simply rebuilding what was there before wasn't going to work.
Exactly the opposite. They upgraded. This effort eventually gave birth to Chile's modern emergency management agency, 1EI.
Right?
They also established a national telecommunications company, Intel, specifically engineered with redundancies to withstand future disasters.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. Furthermore, international aid from the German and Danish governments was utilized to completely modernize the devastated dairy sector in the southern regions, and that transformed the local economy for decades to follow.
So it was really the birth of modern technocratic disaster management.
Very much so.
But while the government was relying on engineering and bureaucracy, you have a starkly different response in the highly isolated coastal village of Kalulufu. The source material detailing what happened there is deeply intense.
Yeah, it's a very heavy story. Kalulufu was home to the native Mapuche people, specifically the Lafkench community. Because of the region's geography and the total destruction of the roads, they were entirely cut off from the rest of the country.
Left completely to fend for themselves.
Exactly. They had no radios, no bulldozers, and no outside contact. They were facing successive tsunamis, the ground was turning to liquid, and volcanoes were erupting in the distance.
To try and calm the violent ocean and the shaking earth, the community turned to a local mashi, a traditional spiritual healer. And the mashi demanded a human sacrifice to restore order to the universe.
Right. And they ultimately sacrificed a 5-year-old boy named Jose Luis Peneker.
It's just devastating.
It is a profound tragedy. But as objective observers looking back at history, it speaks volumes about the human psyche under unimaginable apocalyptic terror.
It really does.
The men involved in the sacrifice were later arrested by the state, but after 2 years of deliberation, a local judge actually released them.
And the legal reasoning behind that release is fascinating. The judge ruled that the men had acted, quote, without free will, driven by an irresistible natural force of ancestral tradition.
Wow.
I mean, how do we even begin to reconcile these 2 extremes happening simultaneously? You have a government using the disaster as a catalyst to build modern telecommunications networks, and just miles away, isolated people are reverting to ancient human sacrifice to make sense of the exact same geological chaos.
It fundamentally comes down to the deep human psychological need for control in an uncontrollable environment.
Right.
The technocrats in the capital sought to reassert control through bureaucracy, engineering, and international supply chains, the modern tools they had access to.
Makes sense.
Meanwhile, the isolated community in Kalilufu, traumatized by a scale of destruction that defied all reason, sought control through the most deeply rooted cultural tools they possessed, ancestral spiritual appeasement. Both were desperate attempts by human beings to restore order when the physical ground beneath them had literally lost its foundation.
It shows that 10 minutes of violent shaking doesn't just fracture rock, it completely shatters the thin veneer of our daily reality.
It really does.
So, bringing this all together, what are we left with? The 1960 Valdivia earthquake was obviously much more than just a day of shaking. It functioned as a geological and societal reset button.
It permanently altered the map. I mean, the tectonic subsidence sank entire towns. But in doing so, it also spawned entirely new ecosystems, like the Carlos and Wanter Nature Sanctuary.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that area is now a massive, thriving wetland full of black-necked swans, existing solely because the land dropped 2 meters during the quake.
That's a beautiful silver lining.
It is, and on a societal level, it modernized an entire country's emergency response system, leaving a legacy of architectural resilience that protects millions of people in Chile today.
Completely reshaped the future of the country.
It did. But this raises an important question, though.
What's that?
Well, we have far better building codes and advanced tsunami warning systems today, sure. But our supply chains, our power grids, and our data centers are infinitely more fragile and interconnected than the agrarian economy of southern Chile was in 1960.
Oh, absolutely.
If a 9.5 magnitude earthquake lasting 10 full minutes hit a major coastal region today, it would test modern civilization in ways our current models likely cannot predict.
And that leads directly to a final, profound detail from the sources for you to consider.
Yeah.
Geologists analyzing soil deposits have found evidence of a remarkably similar earthquake and tsunami hitting this exact same region in Chile thousands of years ago, around 1800 BC.
Over 3,000 years ago.
Right. And the hunter-gatherers who survived that ancient disaster were so deeply traumatized by the sheer violence of the ocean that they abandoned the coast entirely. The archaeological record shows they didn't return to live by the sea for an entire millennium.
1,000 years of generational memory passed down through stories, keeping their descendants safely away from the danger zone.
Consider that the next time you look at a map of our modern, sprawling coastal cities, after 1960, modern society simply cleared the rubble, poured fresh concrete over the fractures, and rebuilt immediately on the exact same fault lines, right next to the exact same ocean.
Just went right back to business as usual.
Exactly. It leaves you with a lingering psychological question. In our relentless drive to engineer our way out of disaster, have we traded the profound generational memory and survival instincts of our ancestors for a blind reliance on modern infrastructure?
It's definitely something to ponder.
Something to think about the next time you find yourself staring at your watch and watching 10 minutes slowly tick by.